Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a nice interaction with our sponsors during the virtual vendor hall, and you've had a chance to have some lunch and maybe catch up on some emails. So now we are gathering for our special session today with my friend, Ember Reichgott Junge, who is the former Minnesota state senator and the author of the 1991 First in Nation Charter School Law. Ember is a tremendous asset for the charter school community because she has an answer, I think, for every myth, every hostile question you might receive. And she's going to do a great job for us today discussing all of that. She's going to give you a little bit of background about her experience in just getting the charter school law off the ground. And as our gift to you, each school has received a copy of her book, Zero Chance of Passage, The Pioneering Charter School Story. And one thing that makes Ember special to us here in North Carolina is she received her law degree in 1977 from Duke University. And Ember, those of us who are Carolina fans, we're going to love you anyway. So anyway, I'm going to let my friend Ember Reichgott Junge take over, and we're going to learn some things from you today. Ember, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, Rhonda, what an honor to be here and a privilege. Thank you so much. And I have so appreciated my relationship with North Carolina over these years. I've been to a few of your conferences, so I have a feeling I've met a few of you on this call. I wish I could hug you in person. It's been such a good journey together in North Carolina. And yes, I am a Duke Law graduate, and I know the state quite well because of that, and was able to come back for some reunions and visited some charter schools in Durham, including, and I've got it here, the Central Park School for Children in Durham, which was really fun. I really enjoyed that. So it's been a great journey together. And then, of course, Rhonda, we met many years ago when you were just getting started in Greensboro. So thank you for your leadership for the last 5 years. And thank you for, again, the invitation. Yes, today I'm going to try to do all that you said, except that the myths just keep on coming, and sometimes we just can't keep up with all of them, but we'll do our best. We're going to do some talking first about the origins, the myths, and then we'll leave some time for questions at the end. So I'm looking forward to that. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to start first of all by saying thank you to each and every one of you on this call. I can't see you, but I know that many of you have had this experience, either founding a charter school or trying to run one. It's like pulling out your hair. I'm a founding board member of a charter school myself, and I'll tell you, it was the hardest thing I ever did. So I have a real appreciation for what you've been doing and a tremendous amount of gratitude for what you have accomplished. My goal today is to give you some tools to help you in your job, because your job is so important. Here's this mural on a charter school in Florida. I love it. The kids did it. Education is the movement from darkness to light. That's what you're doing. You're making that happen for the students that you teach and that you guide. And I want to give you some tools here today to help you make that journey even better, I hope. All right, so let's go on to our goal today. My goal today is to talk about your leadership in transforming a whole system, which is an education K-12 system. And I start with the most important point of all. Chartering is a system redesign. It is not a single school. It's a system redesign. Chartering is a verb. Notice I'm going to use that as a verb throughout. And that's going to be coming back through as we talk. So today, we're going to talk about your leadership in 3 ways and how you can transform the K-12 education system as an educator, as an advocate, and as a messenger. So let's get started with the Minnesota story. We'll start with the origins. Back in 1991, June 4th, to be exact, the Minnesota law was signed. And about 15 months later, this first charter school occurred, called City Academy in St. Paul, Minnesota. And that was formed in September of 1992. This is the 30th anniversary year of chartering, and I view this year as between the signing of the law and the opening of this first charter school 15 months later. So I'm going to be talking 30th anniversary all the way till next September, because I want to raise awareness of this. And chartering overall was about you and me taking ordinary, extraordinary steps for change. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today are the highlights from this book, Zero Chance of Passage. I could not be more grateful to Rhonda for putting it in your school libraries, so your staff, your board members, your parents, your high school students can all have access to this important reference for the future. And it will also help in your messaging. So thank you so much to the association for that. So as I said, chartering started in 91. Well, that is 30 years ago. I got to give you some kind of a context for what that looks like. Meet Nathan. Nathan is a charter school teacher in Toledo, Ohio. This picture is 5 years old. But when I saw Nathan, he told me that he was born in St. Paul, Minnesota in January of 1991. That was 5 months before the charter school law was passed. So you just can take a look at Nathan, add 5 years, and that's how old chartering is in our country today. Now you wonder why we have some glitches along the way. We are still young adults. We're trying to figure this out. That's how young we are. What chartering was, it was about ordinary people like you and me taking an extraordinary stand for change. And today the result is we have chartering all over the country, 45 states. One doesn't have the charter schools started yet. 45 states, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Guam, even in Alberta, Canada. And this is the data. You might have seen it with the National Alliance. Over 3.3 million students are in chartering today. Only 6% of US students. Over 7,500 charter schools, 45 states, what I was just saying, in Alberta, Canada, 1 million names on waiting lists. And by the way, in New York City, there are more names on waiting lists than there are spaces in charter public schools. 219,000 charter school teachers, and you are among those. Thank you so much. 440 million in federal CSP funds. And as you know, there's a little debate on those in Congress, but the bottom line number has not gone down, and that is good. And up to 2016, 2/3 support from Americans around the country. And I ask you, what does 2/3 of America support? The problem is that that's changed since 2016, and there's a reason for that. We've gone down in our support, public support for chartering for a particular reason. And that is because during the Trump administration, there was a Secretary of Education who was known for private school vouchers. So a lot of the public and the media started to conflate private school vouchers and charter schools, which lowered that. So my goal, my mission is to educate and educate and educate the next generation of charter school messengers so we can come back to that 2/3 and people understand what chartering is. Here's some details from the Alliance website, National Alliance website, but the key point here is, yes, chartering has been mainly an urban phenomenon, a little bit suburban, and much less rural, but we need to do more in the suburbs and rural for sure. But on the other hand, some of our main cities, our major cities, have very strong concentrations of chartering, which is helping a lot of students who are in fact Black and brown. As you can see here, only about 1/3 of the students are white, and that's a wonderful thing that we are serving and giving opportunities to children of color. The data shows that there's a larger percentage of charter teachers of color in chartering, and a charter school Black student is 35 times more likely to have a Black teacher in a charter school. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. We need so many more teachers and educators of color. Well, congratulations, North Carolina, on your 25th anniversary. And this is a big one. You came right after, just 5 years later, and you've got a very strong program. And I am very excited to be here to celebrate it. Now, your law was passed on June 21st of 1996. And these were the folks who apparently were the most responsible for it. I've not met them: Senator Gulley, Representative Wood, and Speaker Brubacher. And it was bipartisan. And I believe that's the most critical element of the origins in North Carolina, just like in Minnesota, that it's bipartisan. And even in 2011, when the cap was removed, it was with a bipartisan vote. That's the way it should be, and I hope will continue to be around the country. Other 25th anniversaries were nearby you. It seems like the East was on a roll then. South Carolina, District of Columbia, Florida, New Jersey, Connecticut, and then, of course, Illinois. Well, let's get started with the story in Minnesota. Well, there were 3 visionaries who really helped make this happen. The first was our governor, Rudy Perpich. That was me when I was about 12 or so. And the governor and I were good buddies because we're both Croatian. So there you go. But anyway, this governor proposed to a firestorm of protest that we have open enrollment, which is where students, public school students of any district, could transfer over to any other district. There was open enrollment to any other public school district. Well, the educators didn't like that, and they really rebelled, but it passed. And that was what opened the door to chartering, because once we had more access to choices, and you could go across town or somewhere else to attend a school, you needed more choices to access. And you needed more choices in your neighborhood locally. So that's why chartering came about, because we needed more choices in your neighborhood. The second visionary, Al Shanker, the president of the American Federation of Teachers. You might be surprised by that. He was a real union reformer. And he was feeling like the districts were taking their customers for granted. And guess what? They were, because if somebody moved in a district, they had no choice. They had to go to the local school. He wanted to give their teachers more professional autonomy. He wanted them to be the professionals they were, and that's what he had in mind with charter schools. When he came to Minnesota in 1988, he said charter schools, and I thought, that's it. I am a union-endorsed Democrat. I want to help empower teachers. So Al Shanker was very much a visionary in this. The third thing is a group of citizens that came together. We call it the Citizens League. A group of citizens came together from education, business, labor, civic leaders, saying we got to make some changes in the education system. And so chartering came from outside the political system. Again, that doesn't often happen. It wasn't governors, it wasn't legislators, it was this committee. And I've always felt that the most important thing is for citizens, is for legislators like me to step back and remove the barriers and let citizens take the lead. And that's what you have been doing and are doing. So why chartering? Well, chartering was to open up the K-12 public education system by allowing groups other than local school districts to provide public education. So the key was to create choices outside the current system to make the K-12 public school system more responsive, which, by the way, has happened. Now, Al Shanker, our buddy, said, nah, not so much. We want to stay inside the district. We want the collective bargaining agreement. Charter school advocates said, oh, we really need to have autonomy from that so we can hire our own teachers and guide them. But they can be unionized if they wish, just not within the district collective bargaining agreement. So here I'm going to come back to the very first thing I said. Chartering is system redesign. It allows innovation to happen. That's what your law does. And Ted Coldry, who is, the intellectual thought leader on this, said that innovation is letting people try things. And chartering creates space where different can be tried. And system redesign allows that different to be tried. It allows schools to be created new. And as I was saying, chartering is not a school. Unfortunately, the media thinks that, but it isn't. It's a system redesign. And the bargain in that redesign was that in return for independence, charter school leaders commit to accountability in their performance contract. They must live up to their performance commitments or the school may be closed. What I say is charter schools trade regulation for results, bureaucracy for accountability. And this, by the way, this accountability movement, if you will, has now moved more into the broader K-12 education system, which is a real victory for chartering. Well, let's go back to Minnesota and the story. So I bring this law in on 1991, and you need to understand that we had a Democratic majority in both the House and the Senate, and we had powerful teacher unions that influenced them. The school boards were not exactly happy with this either. And our Republican governor, by the way, who had just gotten elected, was defeated Governor Rudy Perpich. Why? Because the teachers union endorsed the Republican governor because they didn't like Governor Perpich's open enrollment. So we had not a friendly Republican governor. All of those folks were making this a very difficult journey. And in the end, after basically 3 years of effort in 1991, it passed by just 3 votes. And I just want to share my personal journey, and this is more highlighted in the book. But as a union endorsed Democrat, it was really hard. And the reason was particularly because the chair of the largest teachers union was my friend and constituent. She had knocked on doors for me in the campaign. The lobbyist for them was my 9th grade math teacher. I mean, we're talking pretty close. It was a tough thing to break from my union friends, but I was really focused on trying to create more opportunities. Now, the bill passed, but it passed by only 3 votes. And the reason it passed was really 2. The first is it was very much bipartisan. And I even switched the colors because it was that much bipartisan. 56% of the minority Republicans on the key vote in the House voted for it. Only 42% of the majority Democrats voted for it. Now, that doesn't happen these days where you don't have a majority of the majority party. But here's why that happened. That's because this speaker, the Democratic speaker, supported chartering, and he allowed that to happen. And here's how. I remember on the day of this pivotal vote, I was sitting in my Senate office looking up on the television screen, and the votes were being counted on this. And there was a whole lot of red votes, and I thought, this isn't passing. 3 years going down the drain. And all of a sudden, the speaker picks up the gavel and he pounds the rostrum and he says, the secretary will close the roll. I look up and it passed by 3 votes. Now, I didn't know until 10 years or till years later when I interviewed the speaker for the book that there was a reason for that. And that is this. There's only one person in the House of Representatives who can watch the cumulative total of the vote while it's in progress. And that is the speaker. He's the only one who knows. He can stop the vote whenever he wants. And he stopped the vote when we were 3 votes ahead. But 10 members of the House, mainly Democrat, had not voted. And I never knew that. And you say, well, how could he have done that? Well, you have to understand that sometimes legislators don't want to vote on something. And particularly Democrats might not have wanted to be on the board against the union. The speaker allowed that to occur. And in many ways, he was the secret hero of all of this. Moving on, there was another reason why this bill passed, and it was compromise. Now, you have to understand that it was compromised so severely, in my view, that I thought a charter school would never happen, ever. And the reason for that is you need a double approval, folks. Not only a local school district had to approve the charter, but the state. It wasn't one or the other, like alternate authorizers, which is sort of the basis of our autonomy. It was both. I said, this is not going to happen. And I cried. I was devastated. But what I learned later in interviewing for the book is, had we not compromised, we never would have gotten the votes to pass this thing. So in the end, compromise was not defeat. And right away, I realized that almost within days, because our Republican U.S. Senator, Dave Durenberger, took this whole passage of this idea to the U.S. Senate and talked about how the Democrats and Republicans had come together in Minnesota to pass this new pragmatic public school choice. Then on the other side was this guy over here who was then the governor of Arkansas. And he was the chair of the Democratic Leadership Council. And he too put out a press release from the Democratic Leadership Council, which was about the third way in politics, saying this is the third way. And what he said basically is that this was the third way between vouchers, which were being proposed by then President George H.W. Bush, and the status quo being proposed by House Democrats who basically wanted more funding. And he was saying chartering was that middle opportunity to create more opportunities for kids. Now, At the ranch in Minnesota, we passed our bill, which I thought would never start a charter school, and I was pretty much right, because 7 out of 9 of the first applications were declined by the school board. It was like the fox guarding the chickens, okay? And then next, the only 2 charter schools that actually were approved was one that was the Metro Deaf School for special students. And then this one, City Academy, which serves students who had already dropped out of school. And President Clinton visited them in the year 2000. Well, that opened the door then for us to come back to the legislature and say, see, they're not working yet. So we need to make another alternate authorizer. And in 93, we got an appeal to the state board and created alternate authorizers. Now, I really like states that have lots of authorizers. And in Minnesota, my very favorite authorizer is this one. In 2011, the Minnesota union leaders created the first union-initiated charter school authorizer in the country. Why? Because they weren't getting what they had hoped to get from the normal districts. So this was an area where educators led. And now I want to talk about how charter educators have led in other ways. Let's talk about the pandemic. You know what? People started to take notice of charter schools in the pandemic. Why? Because we were doing things really well. We had some innovative ways to deal with it. Our enrollment increased because charter schools were flexible and responsive. Now, here's some data you might not have seen. You know, previous to the pandemic, 50% of parents were satisfied with their schools. After the pandemic, after they had to educate their kids with distance learning and they looked into the system, only 28% of parents are satisfied post-pandemic. The pollster Frank Lutz found that 66% of parents agree after the pandemic that schools should focus on rethinking how we educate students. Well, that, folks, is an opportunity for us. Now, we've already had lots of innovations from chartering educators. In Minnesota, we've had a number of teacher-powered schools, and that's part of why that union-initiated authorizer was created to help support teacher-powered schools. Personalized learning, child-centered learning, many districts are picking up on that. As I mentioned before, the concept of accountability for performance and even closure of schools has now moved to some mainstream district schools. That used to be really foreign to districts. And the other thing that charter educators have done is helped use data, created data to assess, but data now is used to inform instruction, to share best practices, to change bad practices, not just as a measure of performance. All of that came from the input of chartering as a system redesign. Now, the other thing that charter educators have done and are leading, which I love, is that every student, no matter their socioeconomic background, no matter their color or race or religion, they all can succeed when expectations are set for them, and chartering is showing that every day. My favorite example here in Minneapolis is Friendship Academy for the Arts. It was a National Blue Ribbon School of Excellence a couple of years ago, 98% African American, located 1 mile from George Floyd Square. They are educating the leaders of tomorrow in the very neighborhood that needs it desperately. Darnella Frazier was a charter school attendee. I don't know if you knew that. She is the one who taped the death of George Floyd. She is now a Pulitzer Prize winner. Nina Reese recently said, our CEO of the National Alliance, that people are taking notice. We must seize the moment, elevate our work, and expand our reach. That's what you can do as educators. So let's go on to another area. What about leadership as an advocate? I know you've been advocating at the North Carolina legislature and nationally, but you got to challenge the myths everywhere you go as an advocate. Here's the myths. First of all, charter schools get more money than other public schools. As you probably know, charter schools don't get that. They receive 30% less funding per pupil than neighboring public district schools on average. Now, some schools that have help for facilities do better with that. Minnesota, it's 10% less, but it's still less. You are forced to do more with less. People don't understand that. Here's another myth. Charter schools take money from district schools. I would normally ask you to raise your hand and say, anybody heard that? I'm sure you all have, right? You all have. Well, as you know, public money follows the student to the charter school. Every child deserves excellent education. And the way I try to form this for media, for others to try to explain this is I'll say, you know, if my child came from the Minneapolis public schools and transferred to the St. Paul public schools, no question, money follows the student. If my child goes from Minneapolis public district school to public charter school, what's the difference? And why would my child get 70% on average or 90% less than your child? Why is one child worth less than another? In public schools, it's all the same. And so I try to bring it down to where the child, to where we are. It's not about the school. You know what? The reason it's about the school is because the superintendents and the principals want to use the money for their own special purposes, and they often will not have the money following each child equally into the various sections of their school district. All right, another myth, and I'm going to take a minute with this. Charter schools are private schools. I know you've heard that. As you know, charter schools are public schools. But here's the deal. All of us are responsible for this myth. You know why? Because it's how we talk. It's our language. How many times have you heard in the media, and I spend my time writing letters to the editor or notes to reporters, where they will say, well, in September, the schools the public schools opened and the charter schools opened in Detroit. Or, you know, the public and charter schools are doing this. Well, if you say public and charter schools, what does it say? It pretty much says that charters are something other than public. So what I like to say is charter public schools and district public schools. Anytime I talk about it with the public, I use that language. Charter public schools and district public schools. I've talked to teachers in their professional development seminars at the beginning of the year, and I'll say, when you're recruiting your parents, talk about charter public schools. And they came back and they said, you know what? They ask questions then. They have a conversation. I didn't understand they were public. What does that mean? The parents don't understand it either. But if you start the conversation one by one, we're going to change this myth. And don't forget your letters to the editor to correct your folks that say this the wrong way. All right, here you go. Charter schools don't perform. Well, charter schools from low-income families graduate from college at much higher rates than peers in nearby district schools. That was some great research by Richard Whitmore. Another fact that goes to our earlier conversation, the closer a charter school is located to a district school, the better the traditional students perform academically, because there is that sense of having to match what's being done. And so very interesting data that is out there to support our work. Now, there is a myth about for-profit management companies owning charter schools and taking public money. And if you are following the national debate right now, there is a provision in a House bill nationally in Congress saying for-profit schools shouldn't get any of the charter school funding, the CSP funds. Well, the problem is they're saying that something like schools that contract with for-profit agencies can't receive public money, the CSP money. The problem is, how many of you contract with for-profit bus companies, food resources, IT vendors? So does that then cut out all of you? I don't know, but that's the big debate going on in the Congress. But my answer to this is that charter schools are governed by nonprofit boards of directors who choose the management company and can fire them. And if the management company is doing good work, then why would you fire them if you're getting results? Isn't it about results? So this is one that I do try to address, because a lot of people don't understand that charter schools are governed by nonprofit boards. You who are board members totally understand that, and leaders. So the myths of charter school types, everybody say, oh, they're all for-profit. No, they're not. 65% are independent charter schools. 23% are led by large nonprofit networks like KIPP, called charter management organizations. And then 12% are operated by for-profit networks called EMOs. All right, now the last few minutes I'm going to take here before we open for questions is leadership as messenger. I want to help you make your case for charter schools as an advocate, as an educator, and as a messenger. The case for charter schools I found is the best one I found was done by Frank Luntz a number of years ago when he did this work for the Alliance. And these are the messages that he will talk about. And I think they are still powerful. You ready? The first message is freedom to choose. That is your message that really aligns with your more conservative audience. Equality for every child, expectations met for every child. That is your message for the more liberal audience. Efficient, accountable use of tax dollars. Yes, that should be a message for everyone. We do have to do more with less. And finally, this one resonated with 60% of the focus attendees, survey attendees, opportunity. What gives more opportunity in education? This provides opportunity. So chartering is about opportunity. Now, when you message, you want to get 3 or 4 of those pieces into your message, no matter what the question is. And there's messaging training. You say, and then you segue in. But you know what chartering is? It's about the freedom to choose. We have expectations for every child, equality for every child, and it's opportunity. And then you move into, and you segue right away into your personal story for your school. What is the story of your school? Our student Maria is an example. Well, tell her story. She came to your school 2 years behind. We did this to help her, She left the school, or she graduated now, 3rd in her class. Whatever it is that you want to show as your story, have it on your tip of your tongue and prepare your board members, your staff, your parents, so they all can share a story. So my love of stories and my love of protecting the origins of chartering, and I mean protecting because as you get hit by the right and the left, they're trying to change what chartering is. They're trying to change the meaning of it and call something else chartering. So I am delighted that I was invited by the National Charter Schools Institute in Michigan to create with them the National Charter Schools Founders Library. And this is helping us to capture our history. And I ask you to take a look at it when you have a moment, charterlibrary.org. There are resources there you can use for your board, for your staff. There's history of that I have with Ted Coldery on there, and many, many things that might be a great resource for you. The Charter School Library, by the way, is open to new states. We have done the first 4, and we would love to add North Carolina when that is appropriate. All right, so anyway, why do we need a library? Well, what I realized after I wrote my book, I put all my resources, all my original documents like my speeches and the bills and letters I received and the opponent's literature. And I put that in this box and I took it over to our Minnesota Historical Society. And I said, here, I want this for the future. I want people to be able to access this. So there's the box. Okay. So about 4 years ago, right before we started the library, we went over to the Minnesota Historical Society to check out the box. And there was on the 16th shelf of that warehouse. Yeah, imagine how many people are going to find that, right? So we had to get a little mini forklift and you go, oh, yep, to the 16th shelf. They move the box down and you look at the box. Who's going to do that? The point is, this isn't digitized. There's not anything available for people about the origin. So no wonder people can say what they want to say. There's nothing to refute it. So what we did was form the library to digitize these documents and have those available. And then we started to create the oral histories of the pioneers, like myself and in other states. And that is about keeping the words of the pioneers, having those words straight from the pioneers themselves. Why? Because they're still around. Our history is only 30 years old, and we are so lucky to be able to capture that history. So the library itself, we're changing the chartering conversation, I hope, challenging the relentless misuse of language and origins and purposes. creating a common conversation between the district and charter sectors. I hope that we can find common ground, particularly in 21st century education, which I look at as being personalized learning, teacher-powered schools, things like that. Districts have done teacher-powered schools. And finally, in a day and age when truth doesn't seem to matter, we need to create a fact-based conversation. So check it out, and there may be resources for you, your board, or your staff. I'm going to end with a story, and then we'll turn to questions. So please send your questions to the moderator. Ms. Tess is taking them, and she'll ask the questions if you like. As I mentioned, leadership is so important, and you're doing it in 3 different ways. But I'm going to say that everybody, parents, everybody, you can lead from your chair. Doesn't matter what your role is. You could be the receptionist at the school, kind of like Antoinette Tuff, who I'm pictured with here. Antoinette Tuff was actually the bookkeeper at a school, district school in Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia. And one day, the receptionist wanted to take a lunch break, and so she asked Antoinette to cover for her at the front desk for an hour. And in walks a young man with an AK-24 automatic rifle. And she's staring down this man with a rifle, and she's got a school of 800 students and staff behind her. Antoinette Tuff just went deep inside, and she started to talk to him and talk him down, because she had had a life struggle, a life of trauma, and they just started to share. And she brought him into a room with his gun on his side and sat him down. Obviously, she had notified people, and the police were able to come and stop a tragedy. She led from her chair. Now, hopefully, none of us are going to be called upon to do that. But you never know what you can do, when you can lead, and how you can lead. And I hope that you'll take that to heart from today and from the work you're learning from in this particular conference. What can I do? What are my strengths? What can I contribute that I haven't contributed yet to education, to leadership as an educator, to leadership as an advocate, to leadership as a messenger? What is it I can contribute? And I hope you go and lead from your chair. And so that is the end of this. And I thank you all for being today's charter school pioneers. You are awesome in what you are doing. There is a PowerPoint copy available. If you want that, you can talk to Wendy Dunn or to Rhonda, and they can get you the notes from today if you'd like them. And I also just want to say that the beautiful thing about the virtual season that we've had, hopefully we'll get back to person soon, but is that we can have these presentations in individual schools now. It's much less expensive. I don't have to travel somewhere. So if you need or want to bring this to your own staff or your parents or whatever, I'm happy to do that. We can do it very minimally with the virtual technology that you saw today. So with that, I've got on my watch that we've got at least about 10 minutes left for questions. And so I'm going to turn it over to Rhonda and Tess and just fire away with questions. And I don't know if I'll have all the answers, but we'll try.
Well, thanks, Ember. Yeah, I have a question. I actually put it in the Whova conference app, but I'll go ahead and ask it here. Can you tell us some easy ways that teachers can become chartering advocates, please?
And I know that's a really big issue for you and that you talked about it this morning. Teachers can become advocates in a number of ways. I've always called advocacy the power of 1 + 1 + 1. So everybody thinks, I got to talk to my legislator. Of course you do. But take it a step further. Invite your legislator to your school. Take it a step further. Have your parents invite your legislator to the school. Have the parents, especially during a campaign season, have them come and visit with the students. 1 + 1 + 1. Okay, so that's for your legislators. But guess what? Your neighbors are all connected to other people. Talk about chartering over the fence with your neighbor. Talk about it at work. Help people understand it. My mission is to educate the next generation of messengers. You are the messengers. And the more people, 1 + 1 + 1, that get it, the more public support there will be. The other thing is learn how to tell your story. That's a whole nother seminar that I have done in the past, and that is telling your message and your story in 2 minutes or less. So if you have the student, Maria, that we talked about, figure out what that is and how to make it impactful in 2 minutes or less. And every time you talk to media, every time you talk to somebody in the grocery store or an advocate or a legislator, you tell that story. And then you have the parent reinforce that. So they listen to their constituents, and we're seeing that more and more where they are being responsive to their constituencies.
I love
I'm
that.
sure you're doing a lot of that,
1 +
Rhonda.
1.
All right, 1 + 1 + 1.
Yeah, I think
Everybody
right.
adds.
Well, it's really important to be able to tell your story. You know, it's sort of, to me, it's sort of like a personal experience or a religious experience. Nobody can argue with that because that's your story, that's your experience, and if you learn how to tell it effectively, then it can become a very, very powerful educational tool.
And you know why it's powerful, Rhonda? Because your passion comes through when it's your story. And you talk about that student who, did X, Y, Z, and you are so proud of them, just like I'm passionate about this, right? And so, for example, I was telling a story recently about the first charter school, City Academy. And I got so excited when I learned that the chair of the board is a former student, dropped out of school and is now chairing the board. I mean, I love that. You can get just as passionate about it.
Absolutely. I am confident that every school has a story that can be impactful. Switching gears just a little bit, Ember, you talked a little bit about collaboration between districts and charters, and that's one of the things we struggle with here in North Carolina. My opinion is it has a lot to do with the way local funding is given to charter schools here. It goes through the districts first. But I wonder if you can think off the top of your head, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, of any examples you've seen of effective collaboration between districts and charters in other parts of the country. And the reason I'm asking that is because whenever I talk to legislators, one of the questions I've seen over and over I've gotten from them is, well, charters were created to share best practices with districts. How are you going about doing that? And the truth is, we've seen a lot of willingness on the side of charter schools to share best practices, but there is resistance on the side of our public districts or district public schools. So I wonder, are there any examples you can think of where you've seen effective collaboration, and how have they gone about doing that?
Yes, absolutely. There have been. Usually it's around the commonalities, like personalized learning. Everybody, and now with COVID, the culture is changing, the conversation is changing. Now we have to deal with learning loss. That's something common to charters and districts. How are we going to make that happen, and how can we work together? How can we learn from each other? What did you do in your district? What did you do in your charter? We got to bring back our kids, right? So the topic is changing, the opportunity to collaborate, the need. It's less about pointing fingers now. It's more about we've got a common need. And I keep coming back to that. So the personalized learning kind of thing. I have seen, as far as examples, I have seen as far as teacher-powered schools, districts have adopted that. The union has come forward and said, we want to learn more about that. We'd like to have a teacher-powered school in our district or a unit or whatever, and they will use that. The way that data is used, oh my gosh. I'm going to propose a book called Hit the Drum by Sarah Tantillo, which talks about how data was truly being used not just to measure performance, but to help to improve education. Everybody benefits from that. Districts were not using data. Charters led that way. So maybe find workshops and opportunities, not around, district charter, but how do we use data to improve everyday education? So finding those topics where you can work together. The other thing is, obviously, if you have unions within some of the charter schools, some of those folks can be useful in collaborating. I have seen things like this. I think it was in Houston, where the district had low test scores, but they had a lot of space. And the charter school needed space, and they had high test scores. So they all came together. And now everybody's got a higher average of test scores, and they got their space. It's about any kind of way that you find, what do you need? We can give you that. What do we need? We can give you that. And you figure out a way to do that. And again, I'm going to come back, Rhonda, to the power of 1 + 1 + 1. If you have a collaboration in District A with Charter A, that's something to hold up as an example for Charter B and C and D and District B and C and D. Obviously, there's work that can be done at the secondary level. I truly believe it is important that our candidates for teaching in our higher education institutions, Duke included, need to understand both the aspects of both, how they're different, and how they can work together at that level. So they come into the system understanding there's advantages to both that we can learn from one another. So those are just a couple of things that I would say.
Yeah, it's always a win-win when you can find common ground, for sure. I agree with you 100% on that. And the use of data, that's huge now. So good ideas, and hit the drum. I'm going to have to check that book out. I don't want to be the only one asking questions, so feel free, audience, to unmute yourselves and ask Ember a question if you'd like. Tess, do you see any in the chat in Hoover?
There are none at the moment.
Okay.
Well, that's impossible. Got to be a question out there somewhere.
Oh wait, no, there is one question.
Yay.
This comes from Danica Dillard. What can we do to continue building in more areas?
Building what? I wish I could ask her in more areas.
Yeah,
Building facilities, or building in the curriculum, or?
It does not say.
Okay, well, I'll answer both. Building in more areas. Facilities are a big topic. There are a number of organizations that can help to finance facilities that are nonprofit, that can use government funds, incentives to help with that. So I'm not sure if that's where she wanted me to go, but how can we say the question again? Build in communities? Say it again.
What can we do to continue building in more areas?
In more areas. You know what? I would say, can you and your parents become more engaged in other community activities in your local city and state, so that even if it's not about education, but maybe it's about environment, it's about something else you care about, you're there, you're talking to people. So how can you build on what we have is by educating others. As I said, my mission is to educate the next generation of messengers. I believe that is the most important thing if we're going to change and preserve chartering. So unless she chats a little bit more specifically, that's what I would say, but I appreciate the question.
Yeah, Ember, in North Carolina, we're a single authorizer state, and you mentioned earlier that you really like states that have multiple authorizers. Can you talk a little bit about why you think that's valuable?
Well, is your single authorizer the districts, or is it a state board?
It's the state board.
Okay, well, that's better. Many states only allow the school districts to authorize, and you can imagine the gatekeeper there, right? Mm-hmm. You at least have a state board, so that is like an alternative authorizer, and so you actually have that. But I do like more than one authorizer for a number of of reasons. The first is authorizers have different focus areas, and I like authorizers who are willing to support and have the time to support the charter school leadership team with guidance, with data help, with whatever, evaluation help, so that it's not just checking a box. Did you file this? Did you file this? Is your board doing that? It's more a partnership as the charter school grows and gets and improves. So some, like in Minnesota, one is called Innovative Quality Schools. They focus on charters that want to do innovation. There are others that like to focus on, like I said, teacher powered. So they go for the teacher powered schools. The Audubon Society in Minnesota, believe it or not, is our largest authorizer. It's a large nonprofit, and they love to authorize schools that have an environmental focus. Volunteers of America here, and I think that's a national organization. They like to charter schools that have healthcare and health kind of issues for them. So some different authorizers might have different focus areas. So that is one reason why I like different authorizers. But the bottom line is, if you have more than one authorizer, if you have more than the state, and the state doesn't approve you, and you can go to another authorizer because maybe it's more along their lines. Let's say you're eligible, you meet all the quality requisites, if you will, but for whatever reason, for politics or whatever, you're not being authorized there. You have another place to go. Finally, I'm just going to give an example in Hawaii, where I have actually worked with them for a number of years. They are looking to have an authorizer for their indigenous schools to help their indigenous population to maintain their culture. So that's why there's a lot of reasons to have different authorizers.
That makes a lot of sense. With the changes to our State Board of Education here in North Carolina, we've seen it become increasingly more difficult to get charter schools approved. And there definitely is a slant toward anti-charter sentiment among the board as a whole. So, that might be something that we need to think about here in pursuing through legislation. So I don't see any other questions, and we will need to shift now to the next section of the day so that we can get those other rooms up and running. So I cannot thank you enough, Ember. You are such a delight, and you've done so much for us, all of us, in the charter world. And I just really appreciate you, and thank you so much for keynoting for us today. And I'm sure everybody's going to enjoy digging into that book a little bit. It really is a great story.
Thank you, Rhonda. Such an honor and pleasure to do this. Thank you, all of you listening who have spent time to attend this conference, to learn, to become better at what you do, to listen today. And feel free, you got my email there. If you want to ask me a question, kind of communicate, I'm happy to do so. Rhonda, thank you for what you're doing and for making this happen in North Carolina. You're doing well, you're making progress, and I'm just proud to be a part of this. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for those remarks. And it's my pleasure to work for the charter school community here in North Carolina. So everyone, check out the opportunities at 1 o'clock and pick the session that is of most interest to you. And Ember, I'll be talking to you later on.
All righty. Sounds good.
Everybody.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.